You're listening to an exclusive production from Valio, The Manipulator's Curse, Power That Devours, Chapter 1, The Lure of Absolute Control, Awareness Before Influence. Power begins as a whisper. It calls quietly at first, promising clarity, protection, and certainty. You tell yourself you only want order. You only want to guide what feels chaotic. You only want to ensure that what you've built doesn't crumble. But beneath those intentions, a shadow stirs, a craving not for safety but for dominance. The lure of control is intoxicating because it offers an illusion of safety. When you hold the reins, when every outcome bends to your will, the fear of being hurt, abandoned, or betrayed seems to disappear. You imagine that if you can predict every move, no one can surprise you. Yet that same craving, left unchecked, begins to feed on itself. It grows until it consumes the very peace it once promised. Control begins as protection and ends as possession. It transforms from structure into obsession. The human heart, though it longs for freedom, can easily mistake control for love and authority for connection. That is the curse. It doesn't begin in darkness but in longing, the longing to feel safe, valued, and seen. Many who chase control believe they are simply being responsible. They tell themselves they are preventing chaos. But at the root lies something deeper, a quiet terror of losing relevance, of fading into powerlessness, of being forgotten. This fear is ancient. It hides behind ambition, discipline, and strategy. It looks noble, even wise. But the moment it crosses from leadership into domination, it begins to devour the very soul it was meant to protect. Control feels powerful because it masks vulnerability. The manipulator's first target is not another person, it is themselves. They seek to control their own fear by controlling others. Every rule, every test, every subtle pull of the strings becomes an attempt to silence the voice inside that whispers, "You are not enough without power." To understand the lure of absolute control, you must first see the seduction in its rhythm. It starts small. A correction here, a suggestion there. Then, influence deepens into insistence. You notice how people listen when your voice sharpens, how they yield when your silence grows heavy. You learn that emotions can be weaponized, that approval can be withheld until obedience appears. The taste of authority is sweet at first. It brings a rush, a sense of being untouchable, but every rush demands a cost. When you hold too tightly, those around you stop moving freely. They start performing. They say what you want to hear. They become reflections, not partners. And the moment they stop reflecting your power back to you, you feel a chill, the same fear that started it all. You tighten your grip. You double down. And with each turn of that inner screw, you lose a piece of yourself. Absolute control is not about leading others. It's about silencing uncertainty. It is born from the belief that chaos is dangerous, that surrender equals weakness. Yet real strength is not found in domination but in discipline. The manipulator's curse lies in their confusion between the two. Discipline demands awareness. Domination demands submission. One empowers, the other consumes. When you attempt to master everything and everyone, you eventually face an uncomfortable truth. The more you control, the less you trust. And where there is no trust, there can be no connection, no creativity, no life. Authority without trust is a throne built on sand. The tragedy of control is that it never satisfies. It feeds on validation the way fire feeds on oxygen. The more power you gain, the more fragile you become, because now the loss of it feels unbearable. What once was a tool becomes your master. You start to defend your control like a wounded animal, protecting it even when it harms you. Control can masquerade as strength, but it is often a disguise for fear. You may tell yourself you lead because others need your guidance, but somewhere in that confidence hides a quiet desperation. If I let go, everything will fall apart. This belief is the poison that fuels manipulation. It turns influence into obsession and ambition into addiction. But control also teaches, if you are willing to listen. It reveals what you fear most. The moments you tighten your grip are the moments you feel least safe. The people you try hardest to manage are often mirrors reflecting your own insecurities. To break free from the lure of absolute control, you must be brave enough to feel powerless without collapsing. You must learn the art of standing in uncertainty without demanding certainty from others. That is where real authority begins, in the quiet acceptance that not everything must bend to your will. When you release control, you do not lose power. You reclaim energy. Every manipulative act drains you, forcing you to maintain illusions, manage outcomes, and hide motives. But when you act from authenticity, your power no longer depends on compliance. It radiates naturally. Many who fall into manipulation never intend to harm. They believe they are protecting, guiding, or improving those around them. They mistake control for care. But real care honors freedom. It trusts others to rise. It allows mistakes, conflict, and difference. It is the hardest kind of love, the kind that refuses to own. Authority without awareness always corrodes. It starts as strategy and ends in isolation. The manipulator becomes trapped by their own web, unable to rest, constantly calculating. They cannot be spontaneous because spontaneity threatens the structure. They cannot be vulnerable because vulnerability invites risk. And so, they live in a fortress of their own making, safe, but alone. The lure of control thrives on the illusion that predictability equals power. Yet life itself resists control. Every plan meets entropy, every certainty dissolves in time. The more you resist this truth, the more the universe mirrors it back to you in conflict, betrayal, or breakdown. But there is another way. You can hold power with open hands, not as possession but as stewardship. True influence flows, it does not force. It moves like water, adapting, shaping, and nourishing. It leads through gravity, not demand. To reach that level of mastery, you must confront the shadow that seeks domination. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I stop controlling? What part of me believes it will disappear if I am not in charge? Often the answer is not about others at all. It is about your own sense of worth. Control offers a false promise that if you hold on tightly enough, you can prevent loss. But loss is not the enemy, avoidance is. When you avoid vulnerability, you also avoid intimacy, creativity, and peace. The very life you seek to preserve becomes smaller, colder, and quieter. The journey of power is a descent before it is an ascent. You must descend into honesty, into your fears, your hunger for validation, your history with pain. Only by acknowledging these roots can you rise with integrity. Every attempt to dominate is a child's cry to be safe again. To lead wisely, you must soothe that inner child, not silence it. Manipulation is not only external, it is internal. You manipulate yourself with stories of control. I must do this or everything will fall apart. I must prove my strength. I must be perfect. These are chains disguised as standards. The moment you see them for what they are, they begin to dissolve. Imagine standing in a storm without trying to stop it. You feel the wind, you feel the rain, and you remain steady. That is what real power feels like, not the ability to stop chaos, but the courage to remain centered within it. When you lead from fear, you build walls. When you lead from awareness, you build bridges. Control isolates, influence connects. The manipulator commands obedience. The master inspires loyalty. The difference lies in intention, whether your goal is domination or transformation. Absolute control seduces because it hides behind efficiency. It whispers that obedience is faster than understanding, that compliance is safer than trust. But what it never tells you is that it also kills growth. People cannot evolve in the shadow of constant oversight. Neither can you. If you wish to lead without falling into manipulation, you must learn to trust the process of unfolding. Let people reveal themselves. Let situations develop naturally. Intervene only when awareness demands it, not when fear insists. The one who can wait holds greater power than the one who must control. Every empire built on domination eventually collapses under its own weight, but those built on integrity endure. Influence rooted in truth multiplies effortlessly because it does not need to be defended. It grows through resonance, not resistance. The hunger for control is not evil, It is misunderstood. It is the part of you that longs to feel capable in an uncertain world. But capability does not require control, it requires confidence. And confidence arises from knowing that even if things fall apart, you will still stand. When you begin to release control, something unexpected happens. Your relationships deepen. People begin to show you parts of themselves they once hid. You begin to see beauty in imperfection, wisdom in mistakes, and freedom in surrender. What once felt like loss begins to feel like liberation. In that moment, you realize that power was never meant to cage. It was meant to channel. Like electricity, it must flow. Contained too tightly, it burns. Directed wisely, it illuminates. The manipulator's curse begins to break the moment you acknowledge your need to control, not with shame, but with understanding. It takes courage to admit you have used power as protection, but it takes wisdom to transform that protection into purpose. You do not need to reject your strength. You only need to refine it. Authority without awareness is dangerous, but awareness without authority is weak. Balance them, and you become unshakable, powerful without corruption, influential without deceit. So pause. Look at where you hold on too tightly. Listen to the silence beneath your commands. Ask yourself whether your actions are guided by fear or by wisdom, because the line between leadership and manipulation is drawn not by method but by motive. Real mastery begins when you stop asking, "How do I control more?" and start asking, "How do I understand deeper?" When understanding replaces control, power transforms. It becomes clean, calm, and magnetic. You no longer need to force outcomes because your presence itself influences them. That is the paradox. The less you grasp, the more naturally things align. Control devours when it is born from fear, but when it is tempered by awareness, it becomes precision. The same intensity that once enslaved you can now serve you as focus, as clarity, as discernment. The very qualities that made you manipulative can make you wise. Every leader, every lover, every creator faces this choice: to dominate or to direct, to cage or to cultivate. One path leads to exhaustion, the other to evolution. The difference lies not in strength but in surrender. The lure of absolute control will always whisper. It will tempt you with the comfort of certainty and the thrill of power. But if you listen closely, you will hear another voice beneath it, the quiet rhythm of truth, reminding you that real power is never taken. It is earned, shared, and lived. And when you reach that understanding, control no longer devours you. It dissolves, leaving behind something stronger, steadier, and infinitely freer. Mastery born from awareness, authority guided by integrity, and influence that no longer needs to manipulate to feel alive. Chapter 2. Obsession as fuel. Understanding the dark drive behind power. Obsession begins as focus. It feels like discipline, like devotion, like the raw edge of excellence. You tell yourself you're simply committed, that your persistence is what separates you from those who give up too soon. But slowly, quietly, something shifts. The goal stops being about creation or progress. It becomes about control. The object of your focus, whether it's success, recognition, or another person, starts to consume your mind. What once fueled you begins to own you. There is a fine line between passion and obsession, and that line is drawn by peace. Passion energizes. Obsession drains. Passion creates flow. Obsession demands control. You can tell the difference by how it feels in your body. Passion breathes. Obsession suffocates. Passion moves toward life. Obsession clings to what it fears to lose. The most dangerous thing about obsession is how noble it can appear. Society celebrates the relentless, the driven, the unstoppable. We are taught that the ones who never quit are heroes. But sometimes the inability to stop is not strength, it's captivity. Obsession wears the mask of dedication while hiding the truth. That underneath the drive lies fear, insecurity, and hunger that no achievement can satisfy. The manipulator's path is paved with obsession. It is what gives them endurance, strategy, and vision, but also what erodes their empathy, balance, and rest. When the hunger for power becomes the only language you speak, everything starts to revolve around it. You read every gesture, every silence, every interaction as a potential move in your endless game. You stop living, you start calculating. Power, at its purest, is not meant to be hoarded. It is meant to circulate, but obsession locks it in a loop. You begin chasing more not because you need it, but because you cannot imagine who you'd be without it. Control becomes identity. Dominance becomes validation. This is how manipulation feeds itself, through obsession's relentless appetite. Once you've tasted the rush of bending reality to your will, of seeing others respond to your influence, it becomes difficult to stop. You begin to crave that validation the way the body craves air. Each time you succeed, you feel alive. Each time you lose control, you feel the cold sting of withdrawal. Obsession promises mastery but delivers dependency. You start needing the game to feel real, the struggle to feel purposeful. The more you chase control, the less you feel in control. And so, you tighten your grip, hoping the next victory will finally bring peace. But peace never comes that way. It cannot be found in the conquest. It can only be found in release. The deeper truth is that obsession often begins in fear of powerlessness. Somewhere in your past, there was a moment where you felt unseen, unheard, or abandoned, a moment when your voice did not matter. The echo of that experience becomes a silent vow, never again. You promise yourself you will never be small, never be ignored, never be weak. That vow becomes your fire, and if left unexamined, it burns everything around you. You learn to move through life with sharp focus, using control as armor. You convince yourself that you are strong because you cannot be swayed. But strength without softness is brittle. It cracks under pressure. Obsession gives you sharpness but takes your flexibility. You start to lose your ability to adapt, to listen, to be surprised. Everything becomes a transaction of energy and control. What obsession hides is exhaustion. The endless monitoring of outcomes, the silent fear that someone might outmaneuver you, it takes its toll. You might not notice at first because adrenaline feels like vitality. But beneath that intensity, your nervous system never rests. Even when you win, your body stays alert, waiting for the next threat to your control. This is why so many powerful people feel empty. They achieve everything they dreamed of, yet satisfaction lasts only moments before the hunger returns. Obsession cannot coexist with fulfillment because it feeds on lack. The moment you feel content, obsession starts whispering, "Don't stop now, you'll lose everything." And so you run faster, you push harder, you manipulate outcomes more subtly. But you're not expanding, you're orbiting the same emptiness over and over again, mistaking motion for progress. To free yourself, you must face what obsession is really protecting. Beneath every relentless pursuit lies a wound that demands to be witnessed. Maybe you were once powerless in a room full of louder voices. Maybe someone taught you that love must be earned through perfection. Maybe you were praised only when you performed. Whatever the story, obsession is how you learn to survive. But survival is not living. When your worth depends on control, every relationship becomes a negotiation, every goal becomes a test. You stop connecting, you start managing. You stop feeling, you start calculating. You begin to measure affection in obedience and respect in submission. It's a lonely place, powerful perhaps, but profoundly empty. Here lies the dark seduction of power. It promises significance in exchange for surrendering your humanity. It says, be the one who cannot be ignored. But to be seen that way, you must constantly perform. The moment you rest, your illusion of superiority begins to fade. And because obsession cannot survive stillness, you keep moving faster, louder, harder. True mastery is the opposite. It is quiet, grounded. It moves not from hunger but from wholeness. It has nothing to prove and therefore cannot be manipulated. That is why those who have truly mastered themselves appear both magnetic and calm. They radiate power instead of chasing it. If you want to break the grip of obsession, begin by listening to your body. Notice where it tightens when you feel the need to control. Notice how your breath shortens when you imagine losing influence. These sensations are clues, physical evidence of emotional contracts you've made with fear. Ask yourself, gently, what am I trying to protect by holding so tightly? You might find that beneath all your drive lies something heartbreakingly simple, the desire to be safe, to be chosen, to be valued without condition. Obsession thrives on the illusion that control will give you that safety. But the truth is, safety cannot be taken, it can only be built. When you stop feeding obsession, you begin to rediscover presence. You start to see beauty in pauses, in silence, in imperfection. You realize that your worth is not determined by outcomes and that control without connection is hollow. There is strength in focus, yes, but there is wisdom in restraint. When you can feel the pull of obsession and choose not to feed it, that is when you regain true power. You no longer chase. You no longer manipulate. You simply direct your energy with precision, knowing you are not defined by what you can command, but by what you can contain. Consider this. Obsession is raw energy without integration. It is fire without form. When you harness it consciously, it becomes passion, innovation, and purpose. When you let it rule you, it becomes compulsion, manipulation, and self-destruction. The difference lies in awareness. Awareness transforms addiction into art. It takes the same intensity that once devoured you and channels it into something that serves you. The same drive that once burned bridges can now build them. The same hunger that once sought to control can now fuel creativity, discipline, and empathy. But this shift cannot happen while you are still running from the silence within. You must face the void that obsession tries to fill. Sit with it. Let it speak. It will tell you everything you need to know about where your hunger truly began. When you meet that void with compassion instead of control, you dissolve the very force that once enslaved you. You begin to see that power does not come from conquering others or even yourself. It comes from integration, from allowing every part of you, even the obsessive, to find its rightful place in balance. Obsession, when understood, becomes insight. It shows you where your desires are misaligned, where your heart is afraid to trust, and where your mind tries to rule what must be surrendered. Every obsession points to a deeper need for connection, to purpose, to meaning, to authenticity. When you finally stop chasing power as validation, something miraculous happens. The same energy that once drove your manipulation now fuels your magnetism. You no longer grasp for influence, you attract it. You no longer demand control, you embody calm authority. You no longer need to dominate, you simply lead. That is the alchemy of awareness turning obsession into purpose. You cannot eliminate your desire for power. You can only refine it. Power itself is neutral. It is the intention behind it that determines its nature. When power is driven by obsession, it consumes. When it is guided by consciousness, it creates. So ask yourself, what do I truly seek? Domination or direction, control or connection? When you find the courage to answer honestly, you begin to shift from the shadow of manipulation to the clarity of mastery. Obsession is fuel. It can burn or illuminate. It can destroy or transform. The choice is yours, to remain captive to your hunger or to let that fire light the path toward something deeper. Power that serves, ambition that uplifts, and leadership that breathes instead of suffocates. When you master that balance, you no longer fear losing control because you no longer define yourself by it. You walk with quiet certainty, knowing that your energy is too sacred to waste on domination. You move through life not as a hunter of power, but as a keeper of it, focused, free, and finally at peace. Chapter 3. The hidden cost of authority. When control eats away at self and others, power always comes with a price. Sometimes the cost is visible: sleepless nights, strained relationships, the slow erosion of trust. But often the cost is hidden, buried deep beneath the surface of success and strategy. It's paid in silence, in loneliness, in the quiet ache of knowing that what you've built might have required too much of you. Authority feels strong, but it is a delicate balance between influence and isolation. When it's guided by awareness, it nurtures growth. When it's consumed by control, it corrodes the very foundation it stands on. And most of the time, that corrosion begins so subtly that you don't notice until the structure starts to crack. The hidden cost of authority is not immediate destruction. It's the slow, invisible draining of vitality. the way constant vigilance replaces peace, and the way dominance replaces intimacy. Every time you enforce control without awareness, a small fracture forms within you. It's not just others who pay for your control. You pay as well, piece by piece, until the soul feels hollow even under the weight of success. Power that lacks empathy becomes a fortress. You build walls to maintain command, to protect your image, to preserve your sense of certainty. At first, those walls feel safe. They separate you from chaos, from betrayal, from vulnerability, but soon they separate you from life itself. You become unreachable even to yourself. You may find yourself surrounded by people who nod when you speak, who agree with your decisions, who avoid conflict because your presence feels too heavy to challenge. You might mistake that compliance for respect, but true respect is born of trust, and trust cannot survive where fear has taken root. The more you demand obedience, the less authenticity you receive. People start to hide their truth, giving you only what they think you want. You stop seeing reality, you see reflections of your authority. And when everything you see bends to your will, you lose sight of what's real. That is the paradox of control. The more you possess it, the less connected you become. Authority without vulnerability breeds isolation. Isolation, in turn, breeds suspicion. And suspicion leads to even greater control. It's a cycle, one that tightens with every act of manipulation, until power becomes a cage instead of a choice. In your attempt to lead, you may find yourself performing. You smile, you command, you maintain your image. But inside, the fatigue grows. You begin to sense the distance between who you are and who you've become. You wonder if people like you for your position or for your presence. You question whether the loyalty you've earned is genuine or coerced. This doubt is not weakness. It's the first whisper of truth. It's the soul's reminder that authority is meant to be a bridge, not a barrier. Real leadership doesn't require domination. It requires connection, empathy, and the courage to listen, even when it's uncomfortable. Every manipulative act carries a hidden emotional toll. When you coerce, even subtly, you teach yourself that trust is unsafe. You start to believe that others will only respond to control, not to authenticity. And so, even when you want to open up, you can't. You've conditioned yourself to believe that vulnerability invites defeat. But the human heart is not designed to live behind armor forever. It longs to be known, to be seen beyond status or strategy. The longer you suppress that longing, the more distorted your power becomes. You might begin to project that loneliness onto others, punishing them for the very distance your control created. Authority can make you appear strong, but it often hides exhaustion. To maintain dominance, you must constantly anticipate threats, predict outcomes, and manage perceptions. It's a never-ending performance, and even the strongest will eventually falter under the weight of sustaining it. There comes a moment when the silence around you feels too perfect, when everyone seems agreeable, and yet your intuition tells you something is off. That silence is not peace, it is suppression. It's the cost of power that has forgotten empathy. If you want to see the hidden cost of your authority, look at the people closest to you. Do they speak freely, or do they hesitate before they disagree? Do they feel seen, or do they simply comply? Are they growing beside you, or are they shrinking in your shadow? Leadership without reflection creates dependency. You might think you're helping others by deciding for them, by guiding every move, by fixing their mistakes. But in doing so, you rob them of growth. And in time, their dependence becomes your burden. The empire you built starts to demand constant upkeep, constant intervention, constant vigilance, all because you could not bear to share power. The more control you maintain, the more energy it consumes. Emotional energy, mental energy, even spiritual energy, all of it becomes devoted to maintaining authority. And beneath that surface-level strength, burnout grows like a quiet sickness. You may start to notice restlessness, irritability, or a constant need for validation. You might struggle to relax, even when alone, because to relax means to release, and release feels like losing control. But control, by nature, is unsustainable. Sooner or later, something breaks, a relationship, a reputation, or your own sense of self. Power without humility collapses under its own pressure. The soul cannot sustain endless assertion without renewal, and renewal only happens through surrender, the willingness to admit that you don't have to control everything, that your worth is not tied to dominance. The truth is, the people you lead do not need your perfection, they need your presence. They need your awareness, your humanity, your ability to listen and adjust. Authority becomes destructive only when it forgets that it is shared. Every relationship, even hierarchical ones, functions through energy exchange. The moment that exchange becomes one-sided, stagnation begins. If you find yourself trapped in this loop of exhaustion and control, pause and look inward. Ask yourself, what am I protecting by maintaining such tight authority? Often, the answer is fear of failure, of being replaced, of losing identity. But the ironic truth is that fear grows stronger the more you try to suppress it. The only way to dissolve it is to meet it directly. When you begin to release unnecessary control, something remarkable happens. You start to regain yourself. You rediscover your natural rhythm, the pulse that got buried under layers of duty and performance. You begin to feel again, not just react. You notice details you once missed, emotions you once dismissed. Awareness returns, and with it, compassion. Compassion softens power without weakening it. It turns authority into presence. It transforms command into influence. It reminds you that leadership is not about being above others, but about guiding them toward their own strength. Many fear that compassion will make them vulnerable to betrayal or weakness. But compassion in its mature form is not naivety, it is clarity. It allows you to see motives, to sense truth, and to act with precision. When you lead from compassion, manipulation loses its hold. You no longer need to dominate because your influence speaks for itself. Authority, when balanced with humility, becomes a force of healing. It rebuilds trust where control once caused fear. It inspires authenticity where manipulation once demanded obedience. It gives others permission to rise, not because they must, but because they want to. But this transformation begins with you. The same awareness you extend outward must be turned inward. Notice the ways you manipulate yourself, the harsh standards, the guilt, the endless drive to prove something. Authority that punishes the self will always project that punishment outward. To heal your relationship with power, you must learn to lead yourself with gentleness. Let the inner commander become a guide instead of a critic. Let discipline serve growth, not fear. You cannot offer others what you deny yourself. When you reclaim authority through self-awareness, you stop needing to enforce control. People feel your presence and naturally align with it. Your influence becomes effortless because it no longer comes from pressure, it comes from integrity. The hidden cost of authority, then, is not inevitable. It's a signal, a message that you've drifted too far from connection. Power asks to be balanced with presence, ambition with empathy, control with trust. When those elements align, leadership transforms from a burden into a calling. And if you have already paid the price, if you have lost relationships, trust, or peace along the way, remember this. Authority can be rebuilt, but this time from truth. You can lead without domination. You can influence without manipulation. You can command respect through authenticity, not fear. The true measure of leadership is not how much control you maintain, but how much growth you inspire in yourself and in others. When authority becomes a reflection of awareness instead of insecurity, its cost transforms into investment. Every decision, every word, every silence becomes part of a greater purpose, one that serves more than it consumes. So breathe. Let go of the need to be infallible. Allow yourself to be human in the midst of power, because when you integrate that humanity, you discover the most enduring truth of all, that leadership is not about ruling others, but about mastering the self so completely that others feel safe to rise beside you. And in that rising, power finally stops devouring. It begins to nourish. Chapter 4. Recognizing manipulative patterns. Seeing the dance before you step in. Manipulation rarely enters the room announcing itself. It doesn't storm in wearing a mask of deceit or wave a banner of control. Instead, it moves quietly, subtly, like a shadow that bends itself around the light. It can begin with charm, with flattery, with a gesture that feels thoughtful, or a suggestion that seems harmless. By the time you notice the pull, you've already stepped into its rhythm. Recognizing manipulative patterns requires a kind of inner stillness, a willingness to look not just at others but at yourself. Because manipulation doesn't always come from someone else. Sometimes, it's the voice within you that wants certainty at any cost. It's the small push you give to make life bend your way. It's the quiet rationalization that says, it's not wrong if it leads to the right outcome. This is the danger of the dance. Manipulation thrives in half-truths and emotional fog. It feeds on unspoken fears and unmet needs. It hides beneath the surface of logic while secretly being driven by emotion. To recognize it, you must first learn to see with both clarity and compassion, to understand without excusing, and to observe without absorbing. You might begin by noticing patterns of energy. Every manipulative exchange has a distinct feel, tight, heavy, and subtly draining. You can sense it in conversations that start light but end with confusion. You can feel it in the moments where your boundaries blur, where you walk away unsure of how you agreed to something you never wanted. One of the earliest signs is inconsistency, words and actions that don't align. Someone who praises you publicly but undermines you privately. A person who claims closeness but uses your vulnerability as leverage. Manipulators often test your thresholds, pushing just enough to see how far they can go without triggering resistance. And once they know your limits, they shape their approach to stay just beneath them. But this isn't about blame. The truth is, most manipulation is born not from malice but from fear, fear of losing control, fear of rejection, fear of being unseen. Recognizing the pattern doesn't mean demonizing the person. It means refusing to participate in a dynamic that feeds on imbalance. It means choosing awareness over reaction. Ask yourself, when you feel the urge to control, what are you protecting? When you find yourself being controlled, what part of you believes you deserve it? Every manipulative encounter reveals something deeper, an unmet emotional need, a wound disguised as strategy. In personal relationships, manipulation can take the shape of guilt or silence. Someone might withdraw affection to make you chase validation, or exaggerate pain to secure sympathy. They might play small to keep you close, or play superior to make you doubt your worth. It's a dance that thrives on emotional dependency, on keeping both partners off balance enough to remain entangled. In leadership or work, manipulation often hides behind competence. It shows up as subtle intimidation, selective information, or emotional persuasion masked as logic. The manipulator might present themselves as indispensable, making others reliant on their approval or expertise. They create webs of loyalty, but those webs are woven with invisible threads of fear. And then there's the most seductive form of all, self-manipulation. The stories you tell yourself to avoid pain, the excuses you create to stay comfortable, the way you justify staying in situations that no longer serve you because leaving would demand too much courage. It's easy to spot manipulation in others. It's far harder to recognize it in your own reflection. The antidote begins with honesty, quiet, unflinching honesty, the kind that doesn't need to defend itself. When you catch yourself bending truth, just slightly, to maintain control, pause, ask what you're afraid of losing. Ask what would happen if you allowed life to unfold without forcing it. Manipulation collapses in the presence of radical honesty because it cannot survive transparency. But recognition alone is not enough. You must also cultivate detachment. Emotional detachment does not mean coldness, it means clarity. It allows you to see patterns without being pulled into them. It's the calm awareness that says, I see what's happening and I choose how I respond. When someone tries to guilt you into compliance, You can acknowledge their emotion without absorbing it. When you sense someone twisting truth, you can stay grounded in your own. The key is not to meet manipulation with resistance, but with stillness. Manipulative energy feeds on reaction. It starves in silence. You might also begin noticing how language carries intention. Listen closely to tone, pacing, and word choice, not just your own, but others. Manipulative language often relies on ambiguity or exaggeration. It creates emotional pressure instead of logical persuasion. When you hear phrases like, "you always," or "you never," or "if you really cared," pause. These are invitations to step into a trap disguised as a conversation. But equally important is recognizing your own subtle tactics, the ways you may soften truths, use silence strategically, or appeal to emotion instead of reason. This isn't about self-condemnation, it's about integrity. The more you see your own patterns clearly, the less power manipulation holds over you. Some people manipulate consciously, crafting every move with precision. Others do so unconsciously, repeating learned behaviors from survival or upbringing. In both cases, awareness is liberation. You are not responsible for another person's manipulation, but you are responsible for your participation in it. To step out of the dance, you must stop moving to its rhythm. Don't explain excessively. Don't defend endlessly. Don't prove your worth through compliance. Step back, observe. Let the silence reveal what words have hidden. And remember, when you stop engaging, the manipulator often escalates. They may guilt, charm, or provoke you to restore the old rhythm. Expect it. Their discomfort is not your cue to return. It's confirmation that your boundaries are working. Eventually, the pattern becomes obvious. You begin to sense manipulation before it's named. You feel it in your body, a tightening in the gut, a drop in energy, a subtle alertness. That is your intuition speaking. It recognizes imbalance long before your mind rationalizes it. Trust that instinct. It's not paranoia, it's perception refined through awareness. Over time, you learn to approach power differently. You no longer crave dominance or submission. You seek equilibrium. You no longer need to outmaneuver others because you understand that manipulation is not mastery. It's fear disguised as strategy. True influence doesn't need to twist or trap. It simply aligns energy with truth. Recognizing manipulative patterns is not just about protection, it's about purification. It refines your discernment, your emotional boundaries, and your sense of self. It teaches you to stay present, to question narratives, and to choose authenticity even when deceit seems easier. The dance of manipulation ends when one person stops moving. When you choose honesty over control, awareness over reaction, integrity over influence, the rhythm breaks. The silence that follows may feel unsettling, but it is also healing. In that stillness, you reclaim something manipulation could never touch, your freedom to choose how you engage, how you love, how you lead. You step out of the web not by tearing it apart, but by no longer needing to belong to it. And as you walk away, you begin to see the truth more clearly. Control gained through deceit is never real control. It is a fragile illusion that collapses the moment it's seen. Awareness is the light that reveals this illusion. Once illuminated, it cannot hold you. So learn to see the dance before you step in. Listen for the subtle shifts, the emotional cues, the quiet tug that tells you something is off. Don't rush to fix or fight, simply recognize. Recognition is liberation. And in that liberation, you move differently, lighter, clearer, untangled. You no longer chase control, you embody it through awareness. You no longer fear manipulation, you understand it. And that understanding makes you untouchable. When you can see the pattern, you no longer need to play the game. And that is where true influence begins, not in the power to control others, but in the ability to remain unshaken, authentic, and free. That is how the dance ends, with you standing still in truth, while manipulation fades back into the shadows from which it came. Chapter 5. Emotional Mastery in Power Dynamics. Staying centered amid influence struggles. Power is never just an external force. It is an emotional current. an invisible river that flows beneath every decision, every interaction, every unspoken boundary. When that current runs wild, it sweeps people into chaos. But when it's mastered, it becomes calm, focused, and precise. Emotional mastery is not about suppressing what you feel. It's about learning to ride the current without drowning in it. Most people mistake control for strength. They think holding back emotion makes them powerful. But repression is not mastery. It's tension wearing armor. Real power begins when you stop fearing the depth of your own feelings. When you can witness your anger, your jealousy, your craving for control and not be consumed by them. That's when your energy becomes unshakable. In the landscape of influence, emotions are both your compass and your test. They reveal where your attachments live, where your insecurities hide, and where your sense of self still depends on the reactions of others. Without awareness, emotion becomes a weapon. With awareness, it becomes wisdom. When someone challenges your authority, for example, your instinct might flare into defensiveness. You feel heat rise, your pulse tighten, your thoughts sharpen into battle. That's the body's way of protecting significance. But if you pause, just breathe, observe, let the emotion move through without feeding it, you begin to notice something deeper. The challenge was never about you. It was about what part of you needed validation. This is the essence of emotional mastery, to stay conscious inside the storm, to allow feeling without becoming it, to sense provocation and choose presence instead of reaction. When power dynamics intensify, emotions become amplified mirrors. Every manipulation, every push and pull of authority reflects the emotional tone of the people involved. The one who can stay grounded shapes the outcome, not through domination but through steadiness. Think of it this way. In every power struggle, someone must hold the center. When emotions spiral, whoever remains calm becomes the anchor. Their stillness influences the field. Their composure disarms tension. It's not about silencing others, it's about being the quiet that absorbs the noise without losing clarity. But staying centered isn't natural, it's trained. Emotional mastery grows through friction. You learn it in the moments that test your patience, challenge your ego, or confront your deepest insecurities. It begins with awareness of triggers. Notice what ignites you. What kinds of people or situations make you feel powerless, defensive, or unseen? Those reactions point directly to emotional attachments you have yet to master. Every trigger is an invitation to strengthen your center. It's not an attack, it's feedback from your own psyche. When you're in a conversation that begins to feel charged, practice slowing down your internal pace. Instead of matching the other person's tone, breathe deeper. Lower your voice slightly. Move slower. This regulates the emotional field and signals authority without aggression. Emotional steadiness is not passivity, it's dominance without the need to dominate. When you feel anger, do not reject it. Anger is the energy of boundaries. It tells you where something has crossed the line. But uncontrolled anger burns everything. It destroys the structure it was meant to protect. The skill lies in converting it into assertion, clarity, and courage. Let the energy of anger fuel decisive action, not impulsive reaction. When you feel fear, don't hide from it. Fear often points toward growth. It arises where your identity feels threatened. Breathe into it. Ask what it's guarding. Fear, when met with awareness, becomes intuition, an early warning system that sharpens discernment. When you feel guilt or shame, look at their roots. These emotions are easily exploited in power dynamics because they weaken confidence. They make you pliable, easy to control. Guilt is often the echo of expectations that don't belong to you. Shame is the shadow of an identity you've outgrown. Release them both by remembering that emotional ownership is your birthright. No one has the authority to define your worth. Emotional mastery also requires understanding projection, the tendency to see your own unacknowledged feelings reflected in others. The traits that irritate you most often mirror something unresolved within yourself. If manipulation enrages you, ask if there's a part of you that still uses subtle control to feel safe. If arrogance repels you, ask if there's a hidden desire in you to be seen as superior. Awareness dismantles projection, and in doing so, restores power. In leadership, emotional mastery distinguishes influence from control. A leader who reacts impulsively leads through fear. A leader who feels deeply but stays centered leads through respect. People trust what is emotionally consistent. When your emotional state remains stable under stress, you transmit safety, and that safety becomes authority. Emotional mastery doesn't mean you never falter. It means you recover faster. You catch the spiral sooner. You learn to self-regulate before emotion drives decisions you'll regret. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to pause before responding. That pause interrupts manipulation. It resets the energy. It tells both yourself and others, I am not moved by chaos. Over time, your emotional awareness becomes so refined that you can sense subtle shifts in energy before words even form. You can walk into a room and feel tension before anyone speaks. This sensitivity is not weakness, it's power guided by intuition. It allows you to adapt, redirect, or dissolve tension without force. But here's the paradox. To master emotion, you must first surrender to it. You must allow yourself to feel completely, without judgment or control, until the emotion reveals its message. Suppression breeds manipulation. Acceptance breeds transformation. Every emotion, when fully felt and understood, dissolves into clarity. There will be moments when emotion threatens to undo you, when betrayal, humiliation, or rejection cut deep. In those moments, remind yourself, this is temporary fire. Let it burn what is false, not what is essential. Emotion becomes purifying when you stop identifying with it. You are not your anger, not your fear, not your grief. You are the space that holds them all. To stay centered amid influence struggles, practice returning to the body. Emotion lives in the body long before the mind gives it meaning. When you feel overwhelmed, bring attention to your breath, your posture, your heartbeat. These are the physical anchors of power. A calm body sends signals of authority before words are even spoken. It also helps to develop emotional rituals, small, grounding acts that restore equilibrium. Walking alone after a conflict, writing what you feel until it loses its charge, sitting in silence before making important decisions. These rituals aren't indulgent, they are strategic. They preserve your clarity in environments where emotion runs high. Sometimes the most manipulative energy comes from people who are emotionally chaotic. They provoke to destabilize, to pull you into their storm. Don't match their intensity. When you stay calm, their power dissolves. Your silence becomes their mirror, and in that mirror, their lack of control becomes visible. Eventually, you reach a place where emotional mastery becomes second nature. You no longer fear emotion, you listen to it. You no longer react to manipulation, you read it like a language. You no longer seek to win every struggle, you seek to remain balanced within it. In that state, power stops feeling heavy. It becomes fluid, graceful, intuitive. Influence flows naturally because people trust what is grounded, calm, and emotionally intelligent. You lead not by force but by presence. You guide not through fear but through resonance. And when manipulation arises, as it always will, you no longer fight it with equal force. You recognize it, understand its roots, and choose not to participate. That is emotional alchemy, transforming reactive energy into wisdom and control into presence. In the end, emotional mastery is not about changing how you feel. It's about changing how you relate to what you feel. When emotion no longer dictates your behavior, you are free. When your peace no longer depends on others, you are powerful. Hold that truth close. Emotion is not your enemy, it is your teacher. Each wave carries a message. Listen without drowning. Respond without reacting. Feel deeply without losing yourself. And when the next power struggle comes, as it always does, you'll no longer be swept away by its intensity. You'll stand firm in your center, aware, composed, untouchable. You'll influence without effort, command without fear, and lead without losing your soul. That is the heart of emotional mastery. Not silence, not control, but presence so steady that chaos itself bows before it. Chapter 6. Breaking the Cycle. Escaping Obsession and Control Loops. Cycles of control do not end because we want them to. They end because we become conscious within them. The same emotions that once kept us trapped become the very ones that show us the way out. Breaking the cycle begins not with resistance, but with recognition, seeing the pattern for what it is in all its complexity and seduction. Every manipulative loop starts with a desire. Sometimes it's the desire to feel safe. Sometimes it's the hunger for validation. Sometimes it's the quiet ache to be seen, to be significant, to matter in someone's world. Power and control promise to satisfy that hunger, but they never do. They only deepen it. That is the first truth you must face. Control cannot create peace. It can produce compliance, predictability, even admiration, but not peace. The more you chase control, the more you feed the obsession that keeps you trapped. To escape it, you must turn inward and examine what that obsession is trying to protect. Control often begins as self-defense. It's born from moments where you once felt powerless, when someone betrayed your trust, when chaos took something precious from you, when love became conditional. You vowed, silently, never again. That vow hardens into control. It becomes armor, strategy, even identity. But what once protected you eventually confines you. Breaking the cycle means confronting that armor. You cannot dismantle manipulation while still hiding behind it. You must allow yourself to feel the vulnerability that control was built to avoid. That's the part most people resist, not because they fear weakness, but because they fear exposure. Vulnerability feels dangerous when your worth has been tied to power. Yet there is no freedom without it. The first step in breaking any control loop is acceptance. You must see yourself clearly, without denial, without justification. Ask, where have I been using control to avoid uncertainty? Whom have I been trying to shape, and why? What part of me believes chaos will destroy me if I let go? Awareness is the crack through which the light enters. Once you name the pattern, it loses some of its grip. You start noticing how obsession operates, how it whispers in your mind, how it pulls your focus toward the same problems, the same people, the same cycles. Obsession is a loop of energy without direction. It feeds on attention. Starve it and it begins to dissolve. But starving obsession does not mean suppressing it. You can't fight obsession with force. That only deepens the attachment. Instead, observe it. Watch how your thoughts circle back, how emotion tightens your chest, how desire turns into compulsion. Don't fight it, witness it. The observer is always greater than what it observes. As you become conscious of your own patterns, you'll notice that manipulation, whether toward others or yourself, often comes from unprocessed pain. Every attempt to control someone is an attempt to avoid feeling something. The antidote is presence. Feel what you've been avoiding. Let the discomfort rise. It will not destroy you, it will free you. Breaking the cycle also means reclaiming your energy. Manipulative patterns drain you because they keep your focus outward, on outcomes, reactions, and people. Freedom begins when you redirect that attention inward. Instead of asking how to get others to respond differently, ask how you can remain grounded regardless of their response. That shift reclaims sovereignty. When you stop measuring safety by other people's behavior, your sense of power returns to where it belongs, within you. This doesn't mean you become indifferent or detached from life. It means you anchor your emotional balance in your own awareness, not in external validation. It helps to remember that obsession and control thrive on repetition. They rely on predictable emotional scripts, triggers that replay old stories of rejection, failure, or inadequacy. Each time you act on those triggers, you reinforce the loop. To break it, you must interrupt the pattern mid-motion. This interruption can be subtle. A single conscious breath when the urge to control arises. A pause before sending that message. A moment of silence instead of explanation. These small breaks in momentum create space, and in that space awareness grows. One practical way to dissolve control loops is through reframing. When something feels unbearable unless it happens your way, ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if it doesn't? This question reveals the emotional belief beneath the obsession. Most often, it's the fear of loss loss of love, respect, identity, or certainty. Once you see that, you can choose differently. Breaking manipulation patterns in relationships requires courage because it often means breaking unspoken agreements. If you've built dynamics where others expect your compliance or where you expect theirs, balance must be restored through discomfort. The moment you stop playing your usual role, caretaker, savior, strategist, the system resists. People may accuse you of being distant, selfish, or cold. Don't take the bait. That resistance is the sound of a pattern dying. You must learn to tolerate the silence that follows letting go. Control feeds on noise, on activity, reaction, and reassurance. When you stop engaging, silence feels like loss. But that silence is sacred. It's the space where healing happens. It's where your nervous system learns that safety does not depend on control. Many people who break manipulation cycles feel disoriented at first. The stillness feels empty, even meaningless. They confuse peace with boredom because they've lived so long inside tension. That's normal. Stillness feels foreign when chaos has been your rhythm. Stay with it. In time, that emptiness transforms into clarity. Another key to breaking cycles is self-forgiveness. The manipulative patterns you've used were once survival mechanisms. You learned them to cope, to stay safe, to feel significant. Condemning yourself only deepens shame, and shame, in turn, feeds manipulation. The way out is compassion. You must forgive yourself for the ways you tried to stay alive when you didn't know another way. Forgiveness doesn't erase accountability, it restores agency. When you forgive yourself, you stop fighting your past and start directing your future. You become capable of making choices from presence, not from fear. You'll notice, too, that as you release control, other forms of abundance start to flow. Creativity, intuition, genuine connection. Energy that was once bound in obsession becomes available for creation. When you stop manipulating outcomes, you allow space for possibilities you couldn't imagine while clinging. Breaking the cycle is not a single event, it's a continuous practice. Each time you resist the old pull, you strengthen new neural and emotional pathways. You teach your body and mind that uncertainty is survivable. You begin to trust life again. Trust is the opposite of control. Control says, I must decide everything. Trust says, I can handle whatever comes. That's where true strength lies, not in perfection but in adaptability. You'll know the cycle is breaking when peace feels more powerful than control, when presence feels more rewarding than validation, when silence feels safer than persuasion. You'll recognize freedom not by the absence of triggers, but by the absence of compulsion. To reinforce this freedom, surround yourself with honesty. Build environments where truth is spoken, where emotion is acknowledged, where manipulation has no oxygen. The company you keep either sustains your growth or reactivates your wounds. Choose people who value authenticity over performance. If the old world of control calls you back, and it will, remember what it cost you. Remember the exhaustion, the anxiety, the loneliness that came from trying to bend everything into certainty. Remember that obsession always ends in emptiness. Then breathe, return to center, and choose differently. Breaking the cycle doesn't mean erasing your intensity. It means refining it. The same depth that once fueled manipulation can become the energy that drives transformation. You don't lose your power when you release control, you reclaim it. And one day, without realizing it, you'll find yourself standing in a moment that once would have consumed you, and you'll feel calm. You'll feel no need to fix, to chase, to convince. You'll simply be. That is sovereignty. That is liberation. When control ends, life begins to flow again. You stop performing authority and start embodying it. You stop seeking validation and start radiating self-trust. You stop manipulating to be loved and start loving because you are free. That is the end of the loop. Not because you escaped it, but because you outgrew it. What once consumed you now fuels your awareness. What once defined you now serves your growth. The obsession that once devoured your peace becomes the fire that forges your wisdom. And that is how you truly break the cycle, not by fighting the darkness, but by understanding it so completely that it can no longer deceive you. You see it, name it, and walk away, not in defiance but in quiet mastery. Because freedom in the end is not the absence of control. It is the presence of awareness strong enough to never need it. Chapter 7. Aligning power with integrity. Using influence without losing yourself. Integrity is the invisible thread that holds power together. Without it, even the most gifted strategist will eventually self-destruct. Power divorced from principle becomes parasitic. It consumes rather than nourishes. But when influence is aligned with integrity, it transforms into something luminous, something that amplifies rather than corrupts. Integrity is not a moral facade. It's not about appearing ethical to maintain reputation. It is an inner coherence, a state where action, intention, and truth converge. When you operate from this alignment, your authority carries an unmistakable resonance. People sense it. They trust it. They are drawn not because you demand obedience, but because your presence feels safe, decisive, and clear. But this alignment requires vigilance. Power constantly tempts you to compromise. It whispers, "Bend the rule just this once. No one will know. You've earned this." And often that whisper sounds reasonable, especially when the stakes are high or the reward is seductive. Yet every small compromise chips away at the structure that holds your power steady. To align power with integrity, you must start by knowing your non-negotiables. What principles form the backbone of your authority? What values will you not betray, even if they cost you influence, profit, or prestige? Without clear answers, your leadership will drift in the direction of convenience rather than conviction. True authority begins with self-governance. Before leading others, you must master your inner impulses. The hunger for validation, the urge to dominate, the fear of losing control. These forces, when left unexamined, quietly manipulate your decisions. They make you reactive instead of intentional. But when you learn to observe them, when you see your own shadow without judgment, you reclaim choice. You no longer serve your impulses, they serve you. Integrity also thrives on transparency, not the performative kind, but the quiet honesty that keeps your motives clean. This doesn't mean exposing every thought or vulnerability. It means being internally truthful about why you act. If your actions are driven by ego, name it. If fear shapes your choices, acknowledge it. Awareness purifies motive. Once you see your own truth clearly, manipulation loses its power to distort your path. Power aligned with integrity often feels slower, less dramatic. There's less adrenaline, fewer shortcuts. You might watch others rise faster through deceit or flattery and wonder if your restraint makes you weak. But ethical power is cumulative. It compounds over time. Each decision grounded in principle strengthens your foundation, attracting allies and opportunities that endure. There's a sacred paradox here. The more you release the need to control outcomes through manipulation, the more naturally influence flows to you. People trust those who move with grounded certainty. Integrity creates gravity. You no longer have to chase validation or loyalty. They orbit around your consistency. Still, integrity demands courage. It requires walking away when staying would mean self-betrayal. It requires silence when speaking would distort truth. It requires restraint when revenge would feel righteous. Integrity often feels lonely, but it's in that solitude that your true strength matures. Every time you choose integrity over expedience, you reclaim a piece of your soul from the grip of corruption. And eventually, your power becomes an instrument of service, not self-preservation. You no longer wield it to fill emptiness, but to cultivate alignment within yourself and within the systems you touch. When you lead with integrity, your presence redefines what power means for everyone around you. You become a mirror of possibility, a reminder that influence and morality can coexist, that control can evolve into stewardship, and that ambition can be disciplined by conscience. This is not naive idealism. It is strategic mastery. The leader who governs from integrity is unpredictable to manipulators, unshakable to critics, and irresistible to those who value authenticity. To align power with integrity, ask yourself regularly, is this action consistent with my inner truth? Am I seeking control, or am I guiding toward clarity? Does this decision expand trust, or does it erode it? These questions turn your moral compass into an operational system. Over time, they become reflexes that shape your every move. Integrity is the alchemy that turns ambition into wisdom. It's what allows the manipulator to evolve into a leader, the controller into a creator, and the obsessed into the enlightened. It doesn't strip power of its potency, it refines it. When integrity becomes your strategy, power no longer consumes you. It becomes an extension of your truth, precise, disciplined, and deeply alive. Chapter 8. Building healthy influence, turning leadership into a force for good. Power, when purified by awareness and integrity, becomes influence, a quieter, more enduring form of authority. Where manipulation forces outcomes, influence shapes them organically. It's not about coercion or dominance, it's about resonance. Healthy influence is the art of making others want what is good, not just what you want. To build healthy influence, you must understand that people respond not to commands but to energy. Influence begins long before you speak, in your tone, your presence, your consistency. When others sense calm assurance in your demeanor, they trust you. When they feel alignment between your words and your actions, they follow without resistance. This chapter is about mastering that alignment. It's about creating a magnetic field of trust that draws cooperation, loyalty, and respect, not through fear but through emotional intelligence and ethical authority. The foundation of healthy influence, safety. At the heart of influence lies one primal human need, safety. People cannot be guided by you if they do not feel safe with you. Safety doesn't come from agreement, it comes from predictability. When others can anticipate your behavior, when they know you'll respond with fairness even in tension, they relax their defenses. Their nervous system stops scanning for danger and genuine dialogue becomes possible. Manipulators exploit fear to create control. Leaders dissolve fear to create connection. The difference is profound. When people feel safe in your presence, their creativity, honesty, and accountability rise naturally. You no longer have to pull them, they move with you. Listening as influence. One of the most underrated tools of influence is silence. Most people listen to respond. The influential listen to understand. True listening suspends the need to fix, defend, or dominate. It invites others into your presence as equals, not subordinates. When you listen deeply, you reflect the emotions beneath the words frustration, hope, fear, longing. And in doing so, you create an emotional mirror that helps others see themselves more clearly. This builds trust faster than any display of intellect or authority. Influence isn't about being the loudest voice. It's about being the most attuned one. Authenticity as magnetism. Healthy influence thrives on authenticity. You don't need to perform confidence. You need to embody it. Authentic leaders show humanity without collapsing into weakness. They admit mistakes but also stand firm in their vision. This paradox, strength with humility, is magnetic. People follow authenticity because it feels real in a world saturated with performance. The moment your audience feels your truth, they unconsciously grant you permission to guide them. You become the trusted frequency in a sea of noise, energy, emotion, and containment. Influence is not just intellectual, it's energetic. The more emotionally regulated you are, the more influential your presence becomes. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion, it means containing it skillfully. When others lose control, your calm becomes the stabilizing anchor. When chaos rises, your steadiness becomes authority. To build healthy influence, you must learn to carry both your power and your peace. A leader who cannot hold tension without spilling emotion becomes reactive and predictable, easy to manipulate. But one who can hold silence, pause before responding, and channel emotion into clarity becomes unshakable. Reciprocity and empowerment. Manipulation seeks to extract value. Influence seeks to expand it. You build lasting influence by giving others power, not taking it away. Empowerment doesn't weaken your authority. It multiplies it. When people feel seen, trusted, and capable under your leadership, they grow loyal not to your image but to your vision. Reciprocity is the invisible engine of influence. When you contribute to another's growth, they naturally contribute to your cause. This mutual elevation transforms influence from a control dynamic into a creative ecosystem. Ask yourself, does my leadership leave people stronger than I found them? If the answer is yes, your influence is not just effective, it is regenerative. Boundaries protect influence. Healthy influence has limits. Without boundaries, even good intentions can become manipulation in disguise. You must know when to step back, when to let others fail, and when to stop rescuing. Over-involvement breeds dependency, restraint breeds respect. Boundaries signal maturity. They tell the world, I trust your growth process. This silent confidence often has more impact than any directive could. The ripple effect of ethical leadership. When you embody these principles, safety, listening, authenticity, containment, reciprocity, and boundaries, your influence extends far beyond your immediate circle. You become a pattern others unconsciously emulate. Your behavior sets new norms, your calm recalibrates environments, and your ethical consistency begins to shape culture itself. Healthy influence is slow, but it is seismic. It doesn't seek applause or validation. It simply transforms through presence, conversation, and example. And this is the paradox. The less you try to influence, the more you do. Because healthy influence is not about force, it's about gravity. You draw others not by pulling them closer, but by becoming something worth orbiting. Reflection. Ask yourself, does my leadership create safety or fear? Do people leave interactions with me feeling smaller or stronger? Am I influencing from love or from insecurity? These questions are the daily calibration of a conscious leader. Each honest answer strengthens your magnetic field and purifies your intention. The manipulator seeks to control outcomes. The healthy leader learns to trust alignment. When your influence becomes an act of service rather than self-preservation, it transcends manipulation entirely. It becomes art, subtle, human, and transformative. You no longer lead through fear, seduction, or dominance. You lead through presence, purpose, and integrity. That is how power becomes love in motion. Chapter 9. Systems that sustain ethical power, creating frameworks that protect from abuse. Power without structure is like fire without a hearth, wild, consuming, and unpredictable. No matter how wise or ethical you are, if power lacks containment, it eventually turns inward and destroys what it was meant to protect. True mastery isn't just emotional or psychological, it's systemic. Systems, whether in business, relationships, or self-governance, act as invisible architecture for ethical power. They safeguard against impulsive decisions, blind spots, and ego-driven choices. Without them, even the most disciplined minds can falter under the seduction of control. In this chapter, we explore how to create the frameworks that hold your influence accountable, not to weaken it, but to ensure it endures. Power needs a framework, not a cage. Some people fear structure, believing it limits freedom. But the right system doesn't confine, it refines. Just as the banks of a river guide its flow without diminishing its strength, ethical systems channel your authority into purposeful, sustainable movement. When power operates without boundaries, it spills into areas where it doesn't belong: emotions, relationships, trust. Systems are not restrictions, they are stabilizers. They transform raw authority into directed influence, ensuring that your leadership remains clear even under stress. Ask yourself, where does my power flow freely, and where does it leak? The answer will tell you where a structure is missing. Accountability as protection. Every strong system begins with accountability. This isn't about guilt or punishment, it's about clarity and feedback. Power distorts perception. It can make you believe you're right simply because you're in charge. Accountability interrupts that illusion. Surround yourself with people who can challenge you honestly, not flatter you conveniently. Encourage dissent. Invite reflection. A leader who silences criticism breeds deception. A leader who welcomes it cultivates truth. Accountability systems protect not just your followers but your integrity. They keep you tethered to reality when ambition threatens to lift you too high above consequence. Checks and balances in personal power. Even within yourself, you can design checks and balances. When you feel the urge to control, pause. When you crave recognition, ask what deeper need is speaking. When you act from emotion, review the result before making it a pattern. Internal systems are rituals of self-regulation, journaling, reflection, mentorship, or deliberate solitude. Each practice ensures your authority remains conscious, not reactive. They serve as your inner counsel, reminding you that power is borrowed, not owned. Transparency builds trust. In personal and professional systems alike, transparency sustains credibility. Hidden motives breed fear, while openness builds trust. Transparency doesn't mean exposing every detail. It means aligning intent with action. When people understand your reasoning, even if they disagree, they respect your integrity. In contrast, secrecy erodes trust faster than any mistake ever could. Make your processes visible. Share the why behind decisions. Let others see how you weigh options and values. Transparency transforms leadership from mysterious to meaningful. Delegation as a system of trust. Many manipulators fall into the trap of hoarding control. They equate delegation with weakness. In truth, delegation is one of the strongest systems of ethical leadership because it requires trust. When you delegate, you not only empower others but also protect yourself from overextension and ego inflation. Shared responsibility creates shared investment. It reminds everyone that authority is not about hierarchy, but about harmony, a coordinated balance of purpose and skill. Delegation is how power learns humility. It teaches you that leadership is not a solo performance but a symphony. Rituals of ethical maintenance. Even strong systems erode without maintenance. Ethical power requires regular calibration, the same way an instrument needs tuning before each performance. Without this, even good leaders drift into autopilot. Create rituals that bring you back to center. Weekly reflections, feedback sessions, value reviews, time spent in silence. Ask yourself hard questions. Did I use my power to serve or to shield my insecurities? Where did I act from fear rather than clarity? Whose voice did I ignore that could have taught me something? These questions keep your authority alive, breathing, evolving, aware. Institutionalizing ethics. For those who lead teams, organizations, or communities, systems must expand beyond the personal. Codify your values into processes. Make fairness measurable. This means establishing clear decision-making protocols, role definitions, and ethical guidelines that don't depend on any single person's willpower. When integrity is embedded in the structure itself, leadership can change hands without losing its moral foundation. True systems of power outlast personalities. They ensure continuity without corruption, power and feedback loops. A sustainable system thrives on feedback. Influence isn't a one-way stream, it's a loop. You act, observe results, adjust, and act again. Without feedback, power becomes blind momentum, fast but dangerous. Encourage feedback from all levels, not just those closest to you. Genuine insight often comes from the quiet observers, not the loud participants. When your system values every voice, manipulation loses its grip because transparency dissolves shadows, measuring power's impact. One of the most crucial yet overlooked systems in ethical power is measurement. Ask yourself, what is my influence actually producing? If your leadership leaves people anxious, depleted, or dependent, the system is broken, no matter how efficient it appears. But if it fosters clarity, growth, and autonomy, then your power is not just functional, it's healing. Ethical power can be measured by the emotional climate it creates. Healthy systems feel calm, creative, and collaborative. Toxic ones feel tense, competitive, and fearful. Tune into these atmospheres. They reveal truth more accurately than reports ever will. The paradox of structure and freedom. At first glance, structure seems to limit freedom. But paradoxically, the stronger your system, the freer you become. When you trust the framework, you can operate with confidence instead of anxiety. Systems are containers for energy. They prevent emotional leaks, ethical erosion, and burnout. They allow you to focus your power on creation rather than crisis control. Without them, leadership becomes constant firefighting. With them, it becomes artful precision. Freedom isn't the absence of boundaries, it's the presence of conscious ones, evolving the system. No system is final. Ethical frameworks must evolve alongside consciousness. As you grow, your structures must adapt to new challenges, relationships, and environments. What once protected you may later limit you. What once gave order may later stifle creativity. Review your systems regularly. Ask whether they still serve your highest values. Be willing to dismantle what no longer aligns, even if it once worked beautifully. The most ethical leaders are not rigid. They are fluid within structure. They know that stability and adaptability must coexist for power to remain balanced. Reflection. Pause for a moment. Consider where in your life structure is missing, where chaos, exhaustion, or secrecy have taken root. Then consider where rigidity has replaced intuition, where rules became prisons instead of guides. Building systems that sustain ethical power is not about control, it's about care. Care for yourself, for others, and for the legacies your influence will leave behind. Power that lasts is power that listens, adapts, and humbly self-corrects. Systems are not walls, they are mirrors. They show you whether you are leading with wisdom or merely reacting with control. When your frameworks hold both accountability and compassion, you create something rare, power that protects rather than devours. And that is the foundation of ethical immortality, influence that outlives its wielder. Chapter 10. The Alchemy of Authority, Transforming Ambition into Wisdom. Power begins as raw energy, instinctive, primal, and consuming. It surges through ambition, pushing you toward mastery, recognition, and control. Yet as with all unrefined forces, power can destroy as easily as it can create. The alchemy of authority is the process of transforming that raw, fiery drive into a steady flame, one that illuminates rather than burns. True authority is not given, it is distilled. It's what remains after ego, fear, and desire have been burned away. The alchemist's work is not external. It takes place in the unseen spaces between impulse and choice. You are not merely learning to wield power. You are learning to become it, calm, centered, unshakable. Ambition, the first fire. Every transformation begins with ambition. Ambition is sacred when understood and dangerous when denied. It's the initial spark that drives movement, innovation, and growth. Without it, there is stagnation. But unchecked, ambition becomes obsession, the hunger that devours meaning. The first step of alchemy is recognition. See your ambition without shame or pride. Study what it wants from you. Does it crave validation or expression? Is it fueled by service or survival? Most people never ask these questions. They chase the surface while ignoring the source. Ambition, when purified by self-awareness, evolves into purpose. And purpose is what turns drive into direction, the crucible of self-awareness. In every alchemical process, there is a crucible, a vessel strong enough to withstand heat without breaking. In your evolution, that crucible is self-awareness. You cannot refine power without looking at the parts of yourself that misuse it, the hunger for control, the fear of irrelevance, the subtle pleasure of dominance. These are not sins to banish, they are materials to transform. Awareness doesn't erase your shadows, it integrates them. It turns blind reaction into conscious choice. Authority born from self-awareness carries gravity. It doesn't need to shout, threaten, or prove. It simply is. People feel it the way they feel the pull of the earth, quiet, constant, and undeniable. The dissolution of ego. Alchemy requires dissolution, the breaking down of what no longer serves. Ego is often the hardest element to dissolve because it disguises itself as confidence. It tells you that power means being above others, when in truth, authority means being within others in their trust, their respect, their willingness to follow. To dissolve ego, you must embrace humility not as submission but as clarity. Humility allows you to see your limits without collapsing into shame. It invites growth, learning, and the wisdom of interdependence. When ego falls away, what remains is essence. The kind of authority that commands respect not because it demands it, but because it embodies it. From control to coherence. Manipulation is fragmented energy scattered by fear, held together by tension. Authority is coherent energy unified by purpose, guided by integrity. The shift from control to coherence happens the moment you realize that influence is not achieved through force but through resonance. You no longer push outcomes, you align them. You no longer chase loyalty, you inspire it. When your internal world is coherent, your values, emotions, and actions in harmony, others naturally organize around your presence. This is the magnetic law of authority. Coherence attracts coherence. Transmutation of pain. Every person who seeks power carries pain. Often, it is the wound of helplessness that drives the hunger for dominance. You may not crave control because you are cruel, but because once you felt unseen, unheard, or powerless. The alchemy of authority asks you to face that pain directly, not to analyze it endlessly, but to transmute it, to let the same fire that once fueled your defensiveness now fuel your compassion. Pain, when processed through consciousness, becomes empathy, and empathy is the secret ingredient that turns influence into healing. When you lead from a place of integrated pain, you no longer manipulate to protect your wounds, you lead to prevent others from feeling the same. That is transformation at its highest level. The gold of integrity. In classical alchemy, the ultimate goal was to turn base metals into gold. In inner alchemy, that gold is integrity. Integrity means wholeness, nothing fragmented, nothing hidden. It's the state in which your outer actions reflect your inner truth. It's how power becomes trustworthy, how leadership becomes sacred. You cannot fake integrity. You either live it or you don't. But the beauty of it is this: integrity self-corrects. When you stray, it speaks. When you drift, it pulls you back. It is the compass that never loses true north, no matter how far you wander into ambition's wilderness. Integrity is what allows power to remain radiant without becoming corrupt. The role of stillness. Authority requires movement, but wisdom demands stillness. Stillness is where you hear what cannot be said, intuition, conscience, alignment. Without stillness, power becomes noise. With it, power becomes signal. In moments of quiet, you see beyond the surface. You notice patterns, motivations, energies. Stillness allows you to act with precision rather than compulsion. The more still you are, the more potent your authority becomes, because every action comes from depth rather than reaction. Transformation through service. The final stage of alchemy is service. Power that serves only the self corrodes. Power that serves others multiplies. When your authority becomes an instrument of collective growth, it transcends the need for recognition. You lead not to dominate, but to elevate. You influence not to control, but to awaken. Service doesn't mean self-sacrifice. It means alignment with something larger than your ego's hunger. It means using your strength to create stability, healing, and opportunity for others. When authority becomes service, it becomes sacred, living as the philosopher's stone. In ancient myth, the philosopher's stone could transform anything it touched into gold. When you integrate the lessons of ambition, awareness, humility, coherence, and service, you become that stone. Your presence transforms environments. Your decisions alchemize conflict into clarity. Your leadership turns fear into focus. You no longer use power, you embody it. Every action becomes alchemical, every interaction an opportunity for transformation. Reflection. Consider your current relationship with ambition. Has it become a source of clarity or a source of anxiety? Have you mastered its fire, or is it still burning unchecked beneath the surface? Ask yourself, where am I still chasing recognition instead of alignment? What parts of my pain could become empathy if I stopped hiding them? How can my power become service without losing strength? The alchemy of authority is a lifelong process. There is no finish line, only refinement. Every challenge is another fire. Every success another crucible. With each transformation, your power becomes purer, quieter, and infinitely more effective. Authority is not the loud command of the one who dominates. It is the calm certainty of the one who has mastered themselves. When ambition becomes wisdom and power becomes compassion, you no longer fear influence. You become its embodiment, balanced, conscious, and timeless. This is the alchemy of authority, the evolution of power into purpose, the transformation of control into grace. Chapter 11. Rebirth through surrender, awareness before transformation. There comes a point when control collapses, and all the careful architecture you've built, your systems, your plans, your defenses, crumbles under its own weight. It doesn't happen because you failed. It happens because the soul outgrows the structure that once kept it safe. Control is a cocoon. Surrender is the moment you tear it open and step into a new form. Surrender has been misunderstood for centuries. It's often painted as weakness, as giving up, as losing the fight. But true surrender is not about loss, it's about allowing. It is the moment you stop gripping reality with white knuckles and let life breathe again. You're not giving up your power, you're remembering that power was never yours to begin with. It moves through you, not from you. When you've lived in intensity for too long, your body starts to speak the truth your mind refuses to admit. Fatigue, tension, short breaths, all signs that you've been holding too tightly. You can feel it in your chest, that subtle ache of trying to manage what was never meant to be managed. The need to control every variable becomes an invisible prison, and surrender, though terrifying, is the key. You may resist it at first, everyone does. You'll try to fix, to plan, to assert, to fight your way through. You'll believe that if you just push harder, the world will yield. But surrender isn't something you can force. It arrives in quiet moments, after the last argument, after the last sleepless night, after the last desperate attempt to hold things together. You don't surrender because you decide to. You surrender because something inside you whispers enough. In that whisper is grace. The kind of grace that strips you bare, not to humiliate you, but to remind you that you are still whole without your armor. When you stop clinging, your energy shifts. You become less like a wall and more like water, still powerful but in motion. Flowing, not fighting. Many people fear that if they let go, everything will fall apart. But often the opposite is true. When you release control, what is not meant for you will leave, and what is meant for you will remain. It's a purification process disguised as loss. You discover who and what truly aligns with your essence, not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. There is a rebirth that only happens through the act of letting go. You begin to see that every ending was actually an opening. Every collapse was a clearing. The very things that felt like death were in truth the shedding of skins too tight for your evolution. It's hard to see this while you're still inside the fire. Surrender burns. It dissolves illusions you once relied on. But once the flames settle, you stand in a clarity that cannot be taught. It can only be lived. You realize that control was an illusion of safety, and surrender is the gateway to real power. This kind of rebirth doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It comes quietly. You might notice it the moment you stop reacting to the things that used to trigger you, or when you wake up one morning and feel peace instead of panic, or when silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling full. These are the subtle markers of transformation, gentle but profound. Rebirth through surrender asks you to trust timing. You can't rush the unfolding. You can only create the conditions for it. Honesty, acceptance, humility, presence. The moment you stop trying to be somewhere else, you return to the rhythm of your own becoming. It is in this stillness that true power reveals itself. Power that doesn't need to prove or perform. Power that moves through grace, not dominance. Power that feels like truth, quiet, steady, undeniable. To surrender is to say, I trust life more than my fear. I trust that what is dissolving is not meant to remain. I trust that what is forming will find me when I'm ready. This isn't resignation. It's participation with the deeper intelligence that governs all things. It takes courage to live like this. The kind of courage that doesn't roar but whispers, "I will not fight the flow anymore." And in that whisper you rediscover your strength. You become the storm and the calm that follows. This is the paradox of surrender. It feels like dying, but it's actually the beginning of true life. It is the death of the false self, the one built on control, and the birth of the authentic self, the one that knows it was never separate from the whole. When you rise from surrender, you rise differently. Softer, yet stronger. Quieter, yet more certain. You stop chasing meaning and start embodying it. You no longer need to force understanding because you are the understanding. Look back at all the moments that felt like breaking points. Were they not also the moments that reshaped you? Each one stripped away what was false so that what was true could emerge. This is how surrender works. It doesn't destroy you, it refines you. Even now, as you read these words, something in you is softening. You may not be ready to fully let go, and that's all right. Surrender doesn't demand perfection. It asks only for honesty. To admit what you cannot control is to open the door to peace. The truth is, surrender is not the end of control, it's the evolution of it. You move from forcing outcomes to aligning with them, from manipulation to magnetism, from striving to allowing. You begin to sense that the universe is not against you, it's orchestrating everything for your awakening. In this space, miracles are not rare, they are natural. They arise when you finally stop standing in their way. So breathe, unclench. Let life unfold through you, not around you. And when fear returns, as it always will, remember this: surrender is not a one-time act. It's a rhythm, a cycle of releasing, trusting, and receiving. Every time you return to it, you rise lighter. Your rebirth is not waiting somewhere in the distance. It's happening now, in every exhale, in every release, in every moment you choose trust over control. Let this be your quiet revolution, the power to yield, to soften, to become fluid again. For in yielding you become unbreakable. And as you walk forward, no longer gripping, no longer fighting, remember, you are not losing yourself. You are finally meeting who you have been beneath all along. That is the gift of surrender. That is the true rebirth. Chapter 12. The quiet after control. Awareness before peace. After the storm of control, after the collapse, after the surrender, there comes a silence so deep it almost feels foreign. For so long, your life has been defined by motion, reaction, intensity. To suddenly feel stillness can seem unsettling at first. It is like walking through the ruins of a life you once held together with sheer willpower, now realizing that nothing is broken, only rearranged. This quiet is not emptiness. It is recalibration. It is your system resetting after years of tension. It is your mind relearning what peace sounds like without the noise of constant vigilance. But peace is a foreign language to those who have lived in control for too long. It feels unnatural to relax when you have been wired to anticipate the next move, the next risk, the next threat. The quiet after control is where healing begins. It's where you stop needing to be on guard. You start listening again, to your own breath, to the soft hum of life around you. The absence of chaos reveals the presence of self. You begin to feel how much energy you once spent trying to shape the world and how much of that can now be reclaimed for living. Stillness can feel like exposure. Without control to hide behind, your rawness surfaces. Old emotions rise like ghosts: grief, fear, regret. This is not regression. It's release. Those feelings have waited patiently for your silence, because only in stillness can they be heard and healed. Control had kept them at bay, quiet invites them in. At first you might crave the old rhythm, the constant motion, the next task, the next problem to fix. Activity feels safe. Silence feels dangerous. But the danger you sense is not real, it's unfamiliarity. Peace takes time to trust. You must teach your body that safety does not depend on control. Safety is presence. In this stage, many people try to fill the quiet again, through distractions, work, relationships, or noise. But every time you reach for something outside yourself to fill the silence, you delay the integration. The real work now is to stay, to sit in the void long enough to hear what it's been trying to tell you all along. The quiet after control is a kind of detox. You are clearing the residue of years spent in resistance. Your nervous system is unlearning the reflex to tighten. Your heart is relearning how to trust its own rhythm. There is nothing to force here, nothing to fix, just the art of being. Eventually, peace begins to feel less like absence and more like presence. You start to feel grounded, not because you are holding on, but because you are held. There's a subtle shift from effort to ease. Decisions come more intuitively. Relationships flow with less friction. You stop needing to chase validation because you start recognizing your own worth in stillness. This is where real confidence is born, not the kind that asserts, but the kind that knows. It's quiet, certain, and immovable. The kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself because it no longer fears being seen, and in this quiet you begin to perceive life differently. Patterns that once felt chaotic now reveal their rhythm. You start to see how everything, every loss, every conflict, every collapse was guiding you here. Not to diminish your power, but to teach you its truest form. There's a humility that grows here too. You begin to understand that control was never wrong. It was simply a stage. It protected you when you needed order. It gave you identity when you felt lost. But now, control has done its job. Its purpose was to give you structure so that you could eventually dissolve it. When you reach this awareness, forgiveness blooms naturally. You forgive yourself for holding too tightly, for trying to force outcomes, for mistaking fear for responsibility. You even forgive others who mirrored that same control back to you. They were also surviving in the only way they knew. In this phase, you no longer see surrender as defeat. You recognize it as integration. You are neither trying to control nor trying to escape. You are simply living. You've learned to move with life rather than against it. This is mastery, not the mastery of domination, but the mastery of flow. The quiet after control is when your intuition sharpens. Without the noise of constant planning, you begin to hear the subtler guidance that was always there. You realize that intuition was never absent. It was just drowned out by noise. Now it speaks clearly, sometimes as a feeling, sometimes as a knowing, sometimes as a deep peace that tells you this is right. You stop rushing decisions. You begin to trust timing. You realize that urgency was often a disguise for fear. True alignment doesn't need to hurry. It unfolds naturally. In this quiet, even time feels different. Days stretch, moments deepen, and you find yourself less anxious about what's next. You begin to understand that peace doesn't come from having control. It comes from trusting what you can't. There's a beauty in simplicity you might not have noticed before. The morning light feels softer. Conversations feel more meaningful. The taste of food, the sound of rain, the way your breath slows at night, all of it becomes vivid again. This is what happens when you stop living from tension and start living from presence. Life regains its texture. But do not mistake this peace for passivity. It's not about becoming indifferent or detached. It's about acting from alignment rather than reaction. You still make choices, still pursue goals, still build, but now from a place of calm clarity, not frantic control. This is what sustainable power feels like. It's grounded, patient, and deeply aware. You no longer need to fight for your place in the world. You simply occupy it fully. And yes, the world will still test you. Situations will arise that tempt you back into control. But now you have awareness. You can sense when you're tightening again, and you know how to return to softness. You understand that control doesn't protect peace, it interrupts it. This awareness becomes your compass. When something disrupts your inner quiet, you pause instead of react. You ask yourself, is this mine to carry? Is this within my influence, or am I trying to manage the unmanageable again? That pause is your freedom. Over time, this practice becomes second nature. You start living from response, not reaction, from trust, not tension. And in that, your relationships deepen, your creativity expands, your energy stabilizes. Life becomes less about survival and more about expression. This is the gift of the quiet after control. It returns you to yourself. You realize that peace was never something to find. It was something to allow. And as you rest in that realization, a soft smile begins to form, not one of triumph, but of truth. You finally understand that nothing outside of you was ever holding the power. It was always within you, waiting for your permission to be still. The quiet after control is the sound of your true nature returning home. It doesn't need to roar. It doesn't need to prove. It simply is. And in that stillness, you rediscover what all the striving was really for, not to dominate life, but to be at peace with it. You are here now, whole, grounded, awake. The storm has passed, and in its aftermath, silence doesn't scare you anymore. It comforts you. It carries you. It completes you. Welcome to the other side of control, where peace no longer feels like surrender, but like power finally resting in its rightful place.